I've known my husband since high school. We were friends for the longest time before we started to date, which eventually led to our marriage. My mother-in-law has always been a precise person. Things needed to be perfect for her to be happy. If something looked off to her in the slightest, she had to fix it immediately. The only time she ever relaxed was when she was drunk, which happened seldom. That was her first mistake. Last Thursday, my mother-in-law sent out a message in the family group chat on my husband's side. She was hosting a gathering that Saturday at 6 p.m. 1800 hours sharp. Her message was formal and typed out carefully, the opposite of how I write. That wasn't the only way of living we didn't share. I'm a very laid-back person. I do things because I want to do them, not because other people think I should do them. I don't let others influence my lifestyle. My mother-in-law sure has tried to, though. She seems to think that since she's made everyone else in the family perfect, she can do the same with me, too. No one in our family is actually perfect, though. They only pretend to be in order to appease the beast. I won't be pressured into being somebody I'm not, no matter how much I'm nagged about it. But the nagging had stopped recently. The one time I went over to her house before the party, my mother-in-law didn't make a snarky comment about me once. We even had a conversation over tea. Maybe this could be a turning point in our relationship, I thought. It wasn't. I never would have noticed something was off. My mother-in-law greeted the family in her stiff, curt manner. The house was spotless when we stepped inside, as per usual. As soon as they settled, the guests began to drink. Nothing too heavy though. Mother-in-law would be upset if anyone misbehaved when it came time to eat. To most of our surprise, she poured herself a glass of wine when she sat down with us. My husband, who sat on the sofa beside me, whispered that he'd only seen his mother drinking 4 times in his entire life. It was odd, but I didn't look too deep into it. She probably was just nervous about the party, with the constant tap of her foot to the floor. When dinner time came around, my mother-in-law was full-on drunk. She slurred her words as she announced the meal she had prepared. Turkey, sausage, roasted peppers, mashed potatoes, and homemade gravy. It looked delicious. I scooped up portions of each onto my plate and made a quick escape from the kitchen to wash my hands. I didn't even notice the vial my mother-in-law was holding as I passed her. When I came back and we all sat down at the dinner table, my plate was right where I left it. Except I noticed something different. I never, ever, put gravy on my potatoes, so who did? Whatever, I'll just get a new portion and give the other to someone else. I headed back into the kitchen, and was surprised to see that all of the potatoes had been taken. Come to think of it, my mother-in-law hadn't baked a huge amount of mashed potatoes in the first place. I'll just switch with whoever in the family liked gravy and had a similar plate of food to mine. Everyone had already started eating when I got back, however. The only person who wasn't at the table was, you guessed it, my husband's mother. She was occupied trying to calm down one of her wailing grandchildren and failing miserably. With so much on her hands, as well as the alcohol in her system, she didn't notice I took her plate of food and replaced it with mine. Dinner was great. I had no idea I'd just narrowly escaped death. My mother-in-law was quiet the entire time we said goodbyes, half-assing every hug that she was given. My husband is the type of person to take years to say his goodbyes, so I sat back down on the couch and waited for him to finish. I only really gave goodbyes to the people I knew well, my husband's 2 cousins and aunt. I'd known them since they surprised my husband with a visit whilst I was hanging out with him all those years ago. I almost jumped out of my skin when I felt a hand touch my bare shoulder. It was my mother-in-law, looking panicked. She asked me if I'd had gravy on my mashed potatoes and I responded truthfully. Her eyes went wide and she looked like she was about to cry. I didn't have the chance to interrogate her because my husband was calling for me. We finally left the house and were headed back to our own place. Though I do love a good get-together, that night was exhausting. I couldn't shake the feeling something was terribly wrong, though. I ignored it for the next couple of days, focusing only on work and keeping the house clean. Until one day I came home to my husband sitting on the couch in tears. His mother had passed away from some sort of unknown poisoning. And that's how I got here, typing out my little story the night before my mother-in-law's funeral while my husband sleeps peacefully next to me. He hadn't gotten a proper rest since she passed, Mourning and planning a funeral did a number on him. I trust my husband and I know he trusts me too, but if I told him what I thought was planned to happen that night he wouldn't believe me. He'd probably hate me for even thinking his mother would try to hurt me. She's never done it before, so why now? I've been trying to tell myself this but I just can't believe it. If she was innocent, why did she drink an abnormal amount of alcohol? Why did she slather gravy on my potatoes when she knew I wouldn't eat it? And why would she ask me about it right before we left? This has to be a mistake, it has to. It must all just be a coincidence. But I can't let it go. I'm such a terrible person for thinking my mother-in-law tried to poison me. Or, is she the terrible person? I don't even know anymore. All names have been changed to keep me out of hot water, legally speaking. For 6 days, I shared a cramped metal pod with 3 other divers, 594 feet below sea level. At that depth, there was a constant risk of explosive decompression, which would have resulted in the cholesterol from our veins being about the only thing left to bury. On the 6th day, a grainy voice spoke over the comms link and gave us the green light, then boss told us to strap on our suits. These came equipped with circulating hot water systems to prevent hypothermia. Typically, foreman teams split into groups of 2, alternating shifts. Not us. Boss was 42 years old and a good family man. I remember how choked up his voice got speaking with his daughter before submersion. When he found out my wife was pregnant, he gave me some great advice. Advice like, build a nest egg and then get the hell out of the diving game ASAP. Soldier and Gamble, I didn't know quite so well. Soldier mostly read in his bunk and trained, whereas Gamble just complained about how none of us played cards. He said the minute the cash got wired into his account, he was booking a suite at the Bellagio. Considering the money we were making, I doubted even he could blow through the earnings at a blackjack table. You ever been on a job that pays this good for a single day's work? Gamble asked me one afternoon, as we sat in the main chamber, an egg-shaped compartment 20 feet long by 16 in diameter. I shook my head. How about you, soldier? Nope, he answered, while doing clapping push-ups in the space between our bunks. It's just weird, you know? All that talk of planting charges and local biodiversity. It sure doesn't sound like we're blowing up a cavern. Boss sat up in bed and made a cut-it-out gesture, his eyes flicking toward this little black cube in the ceiling. A camera. My hand literally cramped up from the mountain of NDAs our employers made us sign, which is another way to say the suits took discretion very, very seriously. Once the command came in, we each used the bathroom. Pro tip, if you want to work in this industry, learn to shit on command, and then piled into the diving bell through a hatch in the ceiling. Like always, I concentrated on my mental exercises. Breathe in, breathe out. They were about the only thing that kept me from obsessing over how, if anything went wrong with the detachments, the chamber would crumble like a tin can. Gauges, switches, and monitors lined the curved walls of the bell. They lit up as we slowly rotated into position and then flushed outside, into the cold water. Boss's voice came over the radio in my face mask. Take it nice and slow. I know we're all itching to get home, but don't be complacent. Let's do this once and do it right. Space out the charges, double check everything's armed. If anything goes wrong, listen to my instructions. You can't imagine what it's like down there, in the bowels of the planet. You're free falling into an open void while Lord knows what swims around you. Every so often you'll feel a ripple and know some strange, alien life form just passed by, inches from your face. Guided only by our headlamps, we plunged until a bumpy and uneven surface rose to meet our boots. Then, we hop-walked around like astronauts. The floor sucked at my ankles, a greedy hidden mouth. It felt like standing on a shag carpet that shivered and flexed every once in a while. Not like any cavern I'd seen. So far as I could tell, we'd landed on some sort of formation with stadium-sized holes threaded throughout, steep, sudden drop-offs my lamp couldn't touch the bottom of. I'd never seen anything like it. Why had they sent us here, of all places? In near-zero visibility, the 4 of us spread out and planted our charges. As the distance between me and my teammates grew, the radio feed broke apart, and an intense panic washed over me. Breathe in, breathe out. Stay calm. We'd trained for this. A dive coordinator once told me if you can't roll with mishaps, you need to get the fuck out of the ocean. He was right, too. Once, my suit's umbilicals got tangled in a boat's tool rack, and the jerky movements from the crashing waves overhead almost separated me from my gas supply. For a moment I squeezed my eyes shut and prepared to meet my maker. But then my brain kicked into gear. Breathe in, breathe out. Nobody else is gonna save you. Through a combination of discipline, training, and sheer dumb luck, I somehow cheated death that day. After 2 hours laying charges, rounding several chasms along the way, I closed in on our starting position. Boss's voice crackled through my face mask. "How we looking?" "Only one more to go," I answered, relieved. "Same here," said Gamble. 15 minutes later, our 3 headlamps converged at the meeting point. Soldier, as usual, kept his responses short and sweet. ETA 10 minutes. Most likely he picked up that sharp, methodical communication style in the military. Not much longer. Breathe in, breathe out. Soon we'd return to the cabin, spend 5 days depressurizing, then I'd get home in time for my son's birth. Every once in a while, water rushed by and whirled around us as something big swam past. Something none of us could see. Maybe it kept out of our lights deliberately. Maybe it wanted to stay hidden. Boss, who could monitor all of our vital signs through a little monitor attached to his wrist, pointed his light at me and said, "We're almost done. Nice and easy. Breathe in, breathe out." Another ripple. What creatures lived at depths of 600 plus foot? Pelican eels. Hatchetfish. Octopus. But none of those stirred the water quite like that. "Nearly there," Boss said, after another quick glance at my vitals. A yellow blob bobbed toward us as Soldier rounded a pit, laying one final charge along the way. While he drifted closer and closer, Boss performed a few last-minute checks, but before he could give the all-clear, the ground flexed, and water particles stirred in front of my helmet. A powerful suction reeled us all downward, like hungry quicksand. As my thoughts circled back to my pregnant wife, I hoped she'd be well compensated for her husband's death. As the intensity of those ripples swelled, each of us careened off in different directions. Someone shouted, "What the fuck is happening?" over the comms. It might have been me. "Everybody stay calm," Boss said, as calmly as he could manage. Breathe in, breathe out. Lose your sense of direction at that depth, and reorienting is a real bitch. Unsure what way was up, and still clueless as to what actually knocked us off course, I kicked in the direction of the nearest light. Our torches drifted closer and closer, still spread out across an area the size of a football field. For a few glorious seconds, I thought everybody might make it out alive. But then, as more shockwaves pulsed out, I got this sense of a giant organism, Leviathan-esque in size and somehow denser than the surrounding blackness, snaking its way out of the pit. One of the lights vanished. In an instant somebody was gone. Swallowed. Taken. My chest went into furious convulsions as I floated helplessly, frozen in place, until part of me became vaguely aware of Boss's voice screaming, "We have to go," through the headset. Breathe in, breathe out. I swam up in the direction of the pod, chasing the 2 remaining beacons. Breathe in, breathe out. Don't think about what happened. Hell, you didn't even see what happened. At this depth, your mind play tricks. My brain was so fogged out I don't remember climbing back inside the bell. Or worrying about the mechanism sealing properly. The hatch closed with a hiss of air, followed by metal divots sliding into place. Once the water drained, Boss got on the comms and brought up Soldier's telemetrics in the hope we could save him. Surely there hadn't actually been some kind of giant life form out there? Surely I'd only imagined that part? The data recorded by Soldier's suit, before it went offline, indicated the poor bastard plunged 1,203 feet in 30 seconds, his internal temperature spiking 30 degrees. My hands would not stop trembling. Not just my imagination then. Breathe in, breathe out. There'd be no rescue mission, nobody even suggested the idea. And from the expression on Boss's face, I didn't think any of us would ever breathe a word about this. No wonder the suits running the operation took discretion so seriously. After Boss punched in a few more keys, a countdown began. Breathe in, breathe out. The concussive force of a powerful blast made us rattle in our seats. Metal groaned all around me, and for a second the bell went dark. I waited for the smooth walls to compact into a sphere no larger than a marble. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in. Lights blinked back on, one at a time. A collective sigh of relief went out, then boss pushed the comms link and announced we were ready for DSAT. DSAT stresses your body. For 5 days, we endured joint pain, headaches, and shortness of breath, speaking only when absolutely necessary, unsure whether whatever took soldier might come back for us. What even was it? Had the charges been meant to kill it? Did it live within the chasm, or had we actually been walking around on some nightmarish creature's back? We emerged pale, disoriented, and drained, like prisoners released from solitary. After so long under artificial light, the sun burned my retinas. Up on the ship, they let us take showers, had the chef whip up meals of our choosing, and then let us call our families only after reminding us about the NDAs. The ship docked off the southern coast of Greenland, where a taxi transported us to a private airstrip. Boss, Gamble, and I didn't hug, shake hands, or even say goodbye. We simply nodded at one another. I'm too much of a coward to tell soldiers' family what happened, so I'm sharing it with all of you instead. I haven't dined since that day, partly because of the guilt, partly because a giant lump forms in my throat at the mere thought of getting back in the ocean. And whenever that happens, I force myself out of that waking nightmare by focusing on the exercises. Breathe in, breathe out. www.reddit.com web link